Story number 1. I thought the city learned my name the night I refused to let go of cold iron, and a future I wasn't sure I deserved. I thought streetlights were enough. I learned they only paint the stage for what waits between them. I thought quiet blocks meant safe blocks. I learned quiet is the sound of a plan already in motion. I thought help comes in uniforms. I learned it sometimes comes barefoot in a robe with a hockey stick. I thought courage is a feeling. I learned it is a grip you do not release, even when your shoulders burn. I had a bartender's clock in my bones, hands steady at midnight, mind soft as the glassware I polished, voice tuned for the last call. When the wine bar on Queen Street dimmed to a hush, and the last couple stepped into the remainder of their evening, I would lace my boots, tuck a single earbud in, and step into Toronto's patient dark. People called it walking distance. 30, maybe 40 minutes when the air wasn't sharp. It felt honest to my body, like a tax paid in motion for the privilege of pouring other people's stories. My route cut past the western edges, treetops leaning over asphalt like listeners. High Park's shadow took up the left, apartment windows the right, and in the middle, a woman who told herself she was careful. Careful meant one bud only. Volume low enough to catch the rattle of a bike chain or the hum of tires. Careful meant noting the reflections in shop-front glass, the corners where hedges tucked visibility away, the cross street where the bus stopped for no one this late. I had done this for weeks, maybe months, long enough to believe this was routine rather than gamble. There is a point in any habit where it switches labels without asking. I don't pretend I didn't hear the warnings. Every woman has a chorus built into her. We calibrate. We compromise. We study doors that open outward. We list the places with cameras in reach. We memorize the bright apartments with plants on the sills because plants mean a person who notices things. I was 23 and determined to keep my life wide, to believe the city could hold me without teeth. That Wednesday had the soft edges of a shift that never spiked. Couples split a bottle, not two. The regular who tipped in jokes stayed sober enough to be almost kind. At closing, we stacked stools, wiped rings off wood, ran the soft roar of the dishwasher, signed out. The clock read not quite midnight when I slid the deadbolt and breathed the cool outside. My coworkers offered rides they didn't want to mean, and I waved them off with the confidence of someone whose luck hadn't yet been audited. The back streets were the kind that feel reserved for you when emptiness is a kind of ownership. Brick, parked cars, a raccoon with better boundaries than most men. I passed the small bakery that only smelled alive in daylight, the funeral home that treated the night like its workplace too. I turned onto the long avenue with trees that knew how to lean, their leaves a roof thinner than I realized. High Park held its dark to my left. Apartment buildings held their private evenings to my right. It was a corridor with rules I thought I understood. The van didn't belong to the block, and I knew it before I named it. White, boxy, a shape that wears its purpose like a mask. It came from behind, drifted past with a politeness that felt practiced, and turned at the next corner. I logged it the way I logged everything, a mental pin that I expected to dissolve. When it circled back, my body made a note deeper than thought. The second loop is the difference between direction and intent. It passed again. Slower now. The driver's window, low enough to make contact without commitment. I told myself, maps make fools of strangers. I told myself, the city confuses everyone. When he rolled to the curb and called out, I did the thing women do. I paused my music, not my walk. He was soft around the middle, sandy hair, the clothes of someone who wants to look like he just left a hardware store. The expression was the real costume, open in a way that makes you feel unkind for doubting it. Are you from around here? He asked, and I answered, because refusing directions felt like an escalation I didn't want. He spoke about a street with signage that never committed to its job. I knew the one. A small jag off the main that hid behind a poorly placed tree. I started to describe the angles with my hands, realized I was doing a bad job of turning air into a map. And he lifted a folded page like a prop in a school play. I will forget if you only tell me, he said. The line, so tuned, it made a small sound in my head. I would name that sound later. In the moment, I called it patience and stepped closer. If this were only a story about a woman making a minor mistake, I would forgive myself quickly. But I had been interviewing danger for as long as I'd been walking alone. It never arrived only as menace. It wore the face of errands and helpful sons, the weight of a couch that needed lifting, the problem that flattered you by assuming you could solve it. I leaned toward the paper because I had been trained to be useful, and because it is hard to be unkind to someone who looks like they might not win many days. He angled the map. I reached. The metal door behind me slid, and the night snapped into a new shape. Before the second man's shoes met the sidewalk, something older than my plans pulled me backward. Instinct is not a voice. Despite what people say, it is a shove. It threw me away from the van's open mouth, away from the reach that was already measuring me. I ran without choosing to. My feet knew where railings lived in this stretch. My eyes found the black iron spines that guarded the shallow stairwell of a business that slept at night. I made for them because they looked like a promise. The first hands on me were arms thrown around my waist, not yet sure whether I was something heavy or something willing. I folded forward, smashed my chest against the railing, and locked my fingers like they were separate from me. There are moments when you stop being a person with options and become an instrument with one function. I was a grip. I was the refusal to open. He pressed his weight back, trying to lever me off like a stubborn lid. My shoulders lit, a kind of fire that announces the border of what you think you can endure. The city around us did not change. The leaves continued their private talk. The stoplight continued its cycle for nobody. The first man called to the driver. The driver opened his door. I yelled my throat raw, not the word help, but versions of pleas that were not requests. That, I remember, the shape desperation gives to language. He tried to peel me from the rails, one finger at a time. He wanted my hands, so I gave him my teeth. I turned and bit the back of his hand, hard, not through flesh, but with the message that I owned mine. The shock sent him a step off me, and rage made him decide to aim for my face. He drew back clumsy, and I hooked my chin toward my chest so that bone met hair, and the back of my head took what was meant for my mouth. I tasted old metal and adrenaline. I did not let go. Kicks found my wrists, not accurate enough to be tactical, but hateful enough to bruise. Every time pain made my fingers loosen, I rethreaded them through cold bars because the future behind me was worse than anything in front of me. He shouted for the driver, his voice changing from plan to problem. The first man's door swung wider. I understood what 2 sets of hands could do to a single grip. I understood that many plans don't fail. They simply multiply. I know exactly when the night tilted again, when the air filled with something that moved toward me rather than away. A shout came from across the street, stretched long by urgency, not crafted for effect. It carried the rhythm of someone whose body had already committed to closing the distance. I didn't look first. I felt what the men on me felt, the calculation in them wobble. The driver froze at the edge of his door. The man at my back hesitated, and in hesitation, there is always a glimpse of the man himself. I turned enough to see a figure cresting the middle of the road, robe tied loose, legs bare, sneakers slapping pavement, a long stick carried with the ease of someone who had shaped muscle memory around it as a kid and never forgot. He did not posture. He did not wave it above his head. He moved like the direct answer to a question that had been asked all night. Off her, he said. The words simple because they did not want to be misunderstood. He reached the driver's side first, and that man remembered an appointment he had elsewhere. Doors slammed. The side panel slid shut with the clean finality of a decision. Tires bit, and the van bolted, too wide on the curve, too fast for the block, gone between trees that tried to be neutral. The man with the stick did not chase. He turned to me because once the threat is moving away, the person on the ground is what remains. "Are you hurt?" he asked. And the sound of the question made my body understand that it could stop bracing. My hands released because they were given permission, and the railing let go of me like a friend. I was suddenly cold. He offered me the kind of help that comes from people who have learned to prepare for strangeness. The light on in a storefront, a kettle that would find steam, a chair that belonged to no one but held everyone. We crossed to his shop, furniture arranged in calm rows, wood grains that felt like proof human hands still made beautiful things. He lived above. The robe and sneakers told me what kind of neighbor he was. He apologized for time, for needing to put something on, for grabbing the stick because nothing else felt honest. I told him not to apologize because language needed somewhere to go. And gratitude is the closest thing to heat when your body shakes. The mug he handed me was thick and cheap and perfectly designed to anchor hands. He called the police because that is the page of the script we pull out when something almost ended you. I watched the steam curl and tried to fit what happened into sentences that could make sense to the kind of people who arrive with notebooks. In the mirror that hung near the register, I saw a girl with red marks at the wrists and a neck that would purple later. I looked older than I had ever looked. It seemed like a trick. The officers took our statements in the careful, tired way of people who understand they are arriving after the fire is out. They asked about the van, the men, the words said, and the hands that moved. We told them. They wrote it down like writing is a force field. When they offered a ride home, I said yes, because even if help arrives late, it is still a bridge over a river you do not want to cross on your own. Before I left, I asked the man with the stick his name. He gave it, first and last, and then shrugged, like names are less important than actions. I remembered the curve of the hockey blade leaning against the counter. I remembered the robe and the way he did not make a story of himself. He said good night with the grace of someone who would keep his window open a little wider now. Survival is a room with new corners. In the days after, I learned where my shoulders held memory. Reaching for glasses on high shelves sent a throb through places that had been asked to be more than they were designed for. I changed my route, then changed it again, then tried not to walk at all until I realized that fear was asking for rent I could not pay. I took rides I did not want to ask for. I stood under brighter lights. I let keys sit between my fingers, not because they would be useful as weapons, but because a small ritual can convince your body it is not defenseless. Friends told me about their nearlies. their justs, their places on the map where the world narrowed. You would think the city would shrink under such confession. It didn't. Not entirely. It grew new labels, the hedges that hide, the doors that buzz, the path I would walk only when others did. Every corner became both warning and proof. I made copies of myself and left one in every mirror on the route, so I would never be alone. The police called once to say they were looking, which is another way of saying they were now in possession of the story, too. I bought a small, cheap camera that watched the front window of my apartment when I was away. I carried pepper spray where it was legal to do so, and learned the laws where it wasn't. I adjusted. I complicated. I did not become smaller, though the world tried to make that the easy choice. I went back to the furniture store with a box of pastries and a thank you card written 3 times before it sounded like English. He had shaved, which made him look like a new person, or a more formal version of himself. He waved away the pastries until I insisted, then accepted them with a smile that cracked the seriousness of the morning. On a side table near the register sat a narrow offcut of maple, sanded smooth, the grain curling like a river. "Take this," he said. "Call it an odd kind of souvenir." I knew better than to argue with generosity. I ran my thumb along the wood and felt the calm that objects can carry when someone has taught them to hold it. At home, I placed the maple on my bookshelf, a small flag planted in the country of my continued life. I did not want a shrine to terror. I wanted proof of the interruption, the way goodness sprinted barefoot across the street and refused to let the story end where someone else had planned. When I dusted it last, like a promise. Nights changed, but did not end. I still finished shifts when the city's talk was low. I still stepped under the same lamps, but I measured them differently. Some evenings, I called a rideshare, a crumpled stack of receipts that looked like caution on paper. Other nights, I walked, but altered the music in my ear. Instead of rhythms, I chose voices reading poems and essays, people placing words in the air that made the street feel inhabited by something more than hazard. Stories fought the stories I did not want to fuel. There are ways to tell this where I become a symbol and the men become shadows. I resist both. The men were planning, choosing routes the way I did, choosing times, choosing a map as prop because practice taught them it works. The person with the stick was not a miracle. He was a neighbor who believed action belongs to ordinary people. And me? I was not brave in the way films insist on. I was a set of choices made under pressure, some smart, some purely animal, all stitched together by a grip that did not open. If that is courage, then courage is less noble than I expected and more available than I feared. Months later, a van passed me on a different street. It was white, but so are many. My stomach flickered, then settled, because you cannot live every second in audit mode. I watched it go, logged nothing more than its existence, and kept moving through a city that had not earned all of my trust but still deserved my presence. I decided I would always look for railings first on every block, a small research habit, like noting where exits are in a theater. I decided I would not joke about it, the way people do to make others comfortable. I would treat my experience as a tool, not an anecdote. When someone new at the bar asked if it was safe to walk home, I did not offer assurances. I offered suggestions. Stick to the light. Claim the middle of the sidewalk. Avoid the van that behaves like it owns the block. Keep your hands free. Know the doors that open late. I did not tell them about my wrists unless they asked. I did not become a warning. I became an index of the things that keep the next person's story boring. Boring is a victory this world doesn't celebrate enough. Some nights I pass the stairwell where those railings still stand. The paint flaked at the spot where my rings scraped. I touch them the way you touch the shoulder of an old friend. They are not sacred. They are metal. But I let my fingers remember. There is a kind of prayer that has no words, only the heat of your palm on cool iron and the quiet agreement that you will keep going. People want an ending that tidies. They like the version where the police call back with names, where a court date arrives, where justice wears a suit and sits in a room with fluorescent lights. I don't have that. What I have is smaller and more stubborn, a piece of maple that reminds me a stranger cut the night in half, a routine rebuilt with better bones, a body that understands its own strength without needing to prove it. There was a time, in the weeks after, when I would flinch at the sound of sliding doors in shops, when the smell of a van's exhaust would pluck at me like a string. That eased. Healing is not a line, but a set of circles you move through until you realize you are visiting the outer ones less. I did not frame what happened as a lesson, gifts me in gratitude. I do not owe the world thanks for the ways it could have broken me, but did not. What I owe is attention, forward-facing, practical, alive. I messaged my mother about it, only after I knew my voice could keep steady across miles. She asked if I would come home, which is a question mothers are required to ask, even when home is another place with other vans and other streets. I told her I would visit soon, that I was okay, that I was not pretending it was nothing. We talked about small things. Small things are the way people tell each other the big ones are being held. On a late shift, the regular who tips in jokes asked why I had switched from wine-colored lipstick to a quieter shade. I told him sometimes camouflage is wiser than flair." He laughed, then caught himself, then left a bigger bill because people try to push kindness through the wrong currencies. I took it and did not apologize. Survival and rent are not enemies. They cooperate. Once, the shopkeeper waved me in during daylight and showed me a project halfway finished. A bookshelf with tight joints and a back panel he had decided to tongue and groove, because good work hides as much as it shows. We stood over it like it might instruct us. He did not draw a line between that night and the wood. Neither did I. We let both exist in the same room without stealing meaning from either. Before I left, he said, "If you ever want the stick, I'll sign it, and you can mount it above the couch." I told him the image was perfect, then refused. Not because I didn't want a trophy, but because I didn't want to orbit that moment forever. Objects, like memories, do better when they don't have to hold everything. My route home remains a negotiation, as all routes are. I count intersections like beads on a string, not with worry, but with a quiet inventory that feels like stewardship. I keep moving. I keep my hands free. I keep my earbud low enough to hear the world. Not because the world deserves my vigilance, but because I do. I am not a cautionary tale, and I am not dramatic inspiration. I am a person who once chose iron over invitation, and learned that sometimes the bravest thing is exactly that: to hold on until help, or morning, or both. If you must know a moral, try this. Tilting toward kindness is not naive. It is strategy. The neighbor in the robe did not become a hero that night. He simply practiced a policy. When you hear trouble carrying a human voice, you go. You arrive with whatever you have. You are not gentle with the people who planned. You are gentle with the person who survived. You walk them into light and pour heat into their hands and give the night back what it tried to take. On my shelf, the maple has darkened a shade. Wood does that with air and time. I sometimes trace the grain before bed, a private habit that says what I need it to say without speaking. You stayed. Story number 2. I thought the city had taught me how to move through the night without becoming part of it. I believed courtesy and carefulness could buy safety at a discount. I mistook friendliness for shelter. I noticed a curtain move, and the whole version of me that trusts strangers collapsed. I ran until even my name felt like it was trying to keep up. Back when I was still freshly graduated and working my first real job in the city, some co-workers invited me to go for drinks with them on a Friday night. I said yes, because that felt like what adults did. Join the unspoken club, where you memorize each other's favorite cocktails and pretend that proximity equals belonging. We chose a club that pounded with fluorescent confidence, and the illusion that nothing bad could happen to anyone who smiled often enough. I kept pace with the toasts, but I paced myself too. The way you pace your breathing inside an elevator that seems a little too full. The city outside the club was a colder species of noise. And then, at around 1 in the morning, I decided to call it quits and take a cab home. I slipped away before the final round, so I could leave with a version of myself I recognized. The sidewalk was slick with a recent mist that made the streetlights look like glass domes holding small, exhausted suns. I patted my pocket, then my jacket, then my shoulder bag. I realized that I'd lost my purse somehow. No cards, no cash, no ride. The night did what nights do when they sense weakness. It leaned closer. I tried numbers, friends, cousins, anyone with a set of keys and no alcohol in their blood. Voicemail after voicemail turned into a chorus of absence. I realized that if I was going to get home that night, I either had to hitch a ride with a total stranger or walk a heck of a long way on my own and in the dark. My fear took the wheel. I chose the road. Sneakers, I told myself, had been the one wise decision of the evening. I set a pace that made regret struggle to catch up. The city peeled back its daytime costume. It was actually kind of cool walking through all those abandoned places. Offices stripped down to screensavers, diners reduced to the scrape of a solitary chair, a laundromat humming to no one, a museum of human activity after closing time. They were usually just teeming with life in the daytime, and now they were very peaceful and empty. Peace can be a performance. Emptiness knows how to pretend it is safe. I kept to the light where the light was honest. I watched my reflection in dark windows, not to admire it, but to make sure there wasn't a second reflection beside me. I found her exactly when I needed to, which is the most dangerous time to find anyone. She rounded the corner on the other side of the street, head up, stride steady, dressed like the night had been planned more carefully than mine. So, when I looked over and we made eye contact, she asked if I wanted to walk together with her. The invitation was brisk, like the click of a seat belt. She crossed with the confidence of someone who's been thanked for saving time. "Kim," she said. She told me her name was Kim, and that she may or may not have accidentally given her cab fare to a bartender who must assumed it was just a tip. The story arrived, pre-laughed, trimmed to fit a stranger's comfort. We joked about how she'd accidentally earned herself some good karma, and that she'd probably get that $20 back somehow in the near future. Walking beside her was like stepping into a bubble of acceptable risk. We traded fragments, where we worked, how our shoes were making heroes of our feet, the small, bright things you say to keep any dark thing from introducing itself. Then the dark thing introduced itself anyway, in the form of a man weaving out of a side street, a smell of stale liquor traveling a step ahead of him, like a weather report. He drifted parallel to us on the other sidewalk, a tide that kept insisting on high. His voice crossed the empty distance, a performance for an audience that had never bought tickets. He called out pleasantries, sharpened into suggestions, sharpened again into insults. One of his sentences landed with that warped sincerity drunk men sometimes have. "Wait, you two are laughing at me, aren't you?" We stayed polite in the way prey animals stay close to trees. Kim glanced at me. "My place is close," she said, tone casual, like recommending a diner that never closes. Bathroom, water, a minute to breathe. The offer fit too well on my need. Now, in the end, Kim suddenly explained how her place wasn't far, and I was welcome to come inside for a drink and a bathroom stop before I walked the rest of the way home. I nodded, as if permission had been granted by someone wiser than me. We turned down a side street, then another. The man's voice thinned behind us, elastic snapping between buildings until it was only a memory, pretending to be sound. The neighborhood improved, as if money was something you could smell when you approached it. Gates. Bougainvillea. The kind of architecture that expects delivery drivers to resent it. Kim's shoulders squared the way people's shoulders do when they are walking toward something that belongs to them. The pathway stones were clean enough to reflect. At the gate, she didn't need a key. The gate wasn't locked, so she just pushed the latch and opened it. It creaked like it had only ever spoken to owners, which I filed away, and then tried to forget I'd filed. The courtyard was terracotta, warmed by the memory of the daytime sun, potted shrubs trimmed into polite shapes that seemed designed to reassure. A motion sensor woke a light that stepped into itself, obedient and bright. There was a security light that turned itself on as we got closer to the door. The illumination rose up and met my upturned face, and through the brief glare, I saw movement where there shouldn't be movement. I swore that I saw a curtain twitch on the second floor of the house. We halted at the threshold of a door, painted the kind of blue that decorators insist is neutral. I asked her, lightly at first, whether she lived alone. She smiled like she'd been asked that question for years and had never once considered changing the answer. She reached for the lock. I stepped back to retest what my eyes had said a moment ago. The light relaxed when we stopped moving. The courtyard took a softer breath. In the replanted darkness, the second floor window answered me again with that small, deliberate twitch, the quiet theater of someone who wants to be a rumor. I said it out loud this time. Kim's voice changed. Not the words, the temperature. Just come inside, relax, have a drink. The syllables brushed past my face as if they belonged to a hostess treasuring a schedule. It was then, finally, late but not too late, that the simplest math began adding itself together in me. We had arrived at a house too nice for her explanation. A gate that was unlocked, a window that behaved like a throat clearing, a woman whose friendliness was trying too hard to keep me from thinking. I drew the line the way you draw a line in sand and dare the tide to move it. I didn't even say bye or anything. I just turned around and walked back towards the gate. She blinked. The smile buckled, and the script showed through its paper. "You're not leaving, are you?" Her voice had too much weight for a question. I kept walking as if demonstration could outpace definition. My scalp learned a new vocabulary. I heard the sound of feet rushing up the path behind me before Kim suddenly grabbed me by the hair. The pain felt like a late fee on a bill I had ignored. Her other hand gripped my shoulder and drove it downward, directing me toward a version of the night I had not agreed to. Then, from less than an arm's length, she raised her face and called to the house with a voice that had never had any intention of being hospitable. "Get down here and help me." Fear has a lever inside the body. Mine found it. I managed to push her to the ground before pulling my hair out of her grip. I tore forward through air that had thickened into a substance. The front door opened behind me in a square of light that was the exact opposite of welcome. I saw someone standing in the open doorway of the house, someone huge, and they were there to chase me down. His shoes hit the stones like punctuation you can feel in your spine. I refused to give the night my back again and again. I gave it my feet, and my feet did not negotiate. The streets tried to arrange themselves into a maze that favored the hunter. I made every corner a vote for survival. The air slid into my lungs like it had been sharpened. I cut through a block of quiet houses and a strip of shuttered businesses until the map finally threw me a mercy, an arterial road where engines argued with distance. I ran toward the argument and put my body in it. I ran out into that road and right into the path of an oncoming car, which obviously had to brake once it saw me. The driver's anger rose from inside his sedan, but my story outran his temper. I pointed behind me at a threat that had already learned how to vanish. The doorway was empty now. The chase had untied itself from the scene. I moved to the median, then to the sidewalk, like a chess piece that had discovered it could change boards. My hands were shaking in neat rhythms, as if my body was trying to teach me something about time. I was suddenly very interested in police officers, and very uninterested in everything else. Most of the walk back to my apartment was spent on the phone with the cops, as I explained how I just escaped a potential kidnapping, or maybe worse. I narrowed my voice to the facts and let the fear wait in the lobby. The dispatcher's questions were exact. I answered them like testimony. Street names, directions, the flagstone color of a courtyard where light had been weaponized into reassurance. The next morning arrived like a letter you do not remember writing. Coffee tasted like a decision. A detective from the state police called before I could invent reasons not to answer. He wore patience the way some men wear expensive watches, not to show off, but to measure everything else against it. He came by with a notebook that had already survived other people's nights. I told him my version of the story and watched his face settle in the places where it made sense and sharpen at the parts where it didn't. The address I gave him belonged to a listing, not a home. Empty rooms, unstaged space, real estate photography waiting to happen. People who shouldn't have been there had been there. Evidence prefers tidy stories, but sometimes it shows up like a confession that won't name names. They were gone by the time the cops showed up, and the only trace of them was a strip of masking tape attached to a wall that the forensics people said was clean. The detective didn't say trap, but the word stood in the room between us like a quiet consultant. He told me I had been smart. I didn't argue, but I did adjust the compliment in my head. Being smart is great. Listening to the part of you that does not need language might have been better. He asked if I could describe the man. I could describe the door frame he filled and the air that moved out of his way. I could describe the way my heart compressed time into something usable. But faces blur when your body is voting on your behalf. The report would be precise where my memory could be, and forgiving where it couldn't. He asked if I'd walk him through it. We took the route in daylight. Daylight is not an apology. It is an alibi. The intersections looked harmless again, like unease that behave differently around children. We stopped at the gate, which now had a chain and a lock that declared retroactive wisdom. The second-floor curtains hung in a patience that felt insulting. That night, I did not fall asleep so much as negotiate a truce with consciousness. The house came back in pieces. The terracotta, the neat shrubs, the light that offered help only to take it away. If I closed my eyes too long, my scalp remembered when it belonged to someone else's hand. I made a list of rules on my phone, things I already knew but now believed. Patterns of safety. The distance between friendliness and access. How a woman can be a lure and a man can be a net, and together they can be a plan. No more unkeyed gates. When in doubt, create witnesses. If a window twitches, let the house keep its secrets. I saw Kim's smile as a kind of architecture, ornamental. load-bearing in all the wrong places. I replayed the joke about the cab money and wondered which parts had been rehearsed. Maybe all of them. Maybe none. Maybe she had practiced until practice felt like personality. The detective called once more, later that week, with the kind of update that is really only an absence dressed as responsibility. No prints of value. No cameras pointed in ways that helped. No neighbors with eyes available at the right times. The house was scheduled for an open house soon. It would wear fresh flowers and call itself ready. I told him I kept thinking about the light in the courtyard. He said predators study the choreography of comfort. They learn which technologies make us behave like everything is fine. Motion sensors, video doorbells. We have so many little suns in our lives, we forget the dark has learned their cycles. I washed the smell of that night out of my hoodie twice, and then once more, as if the third time could teach fabric something permanent. When I walked after that, I walked like someone who had paid tuition for a class that should have been free. In the quiet parts of town, I changed sides of the street as soon as my skin decided to. I didn't wait for my brain to talk it to death. I practiced leaving. I practiced not explaining the leaving. I practiced the version of my voice that asks for help, like it's asking for a glass of water. Calm. Necessary. Not embarrassed to need what it needs. People told me I was lucky. I privately edited the sentence. Luck is a door that opens. Listening is the part of you that notices the door and goes through it. They might have been smart enough to get away with trying whatever they had in mind. But I swear, make them just a little bit smarter. And I'm not sure that I'd be around to be writing this right now. I don't keep souvenirs from that night. I keep the rule about curtains. I keep the certainty that when something tries to lead you toward a version of safety that requires you to be quieter, slower, more polite, you should choose speed, volume, and the kind of impolite that survives. Story number 3. I didn't feel the cold until the phone lit my palm. I didn't hear the traffic until a text said one word. I didn't taste the liquor until fear climbed my throat. I didn't believe in omens until a mirror wrote one back. And I didn't know how long a minute is until I ran inside it. I used to measure nights by the warmth of neon and cheap jokes. In November of 2010, I measured one by the length of a road and the weight of a ringtone. The evening had started with harmless bravado. Steak heavy enough to anchor a ship. A parade of pubs where laughter repeated itself until even the bartenders smiled along. We raised a glass to our friend, turning 25, and I told myself I'd be sensible, that I'd leave while the music still held its charm. I decided to catch the last bus home, the grown-up thing to do. Outside the club, the air felt good, crisp, with midnight's bite. I checked the time, made the mental math, and believed I was in the clear. Then I turned a corner, and hope shrank to a shape with wheels. There it was, my bus, at its stand, swallowing the last few stragglers and preparing to roll. I ran, arms cutting through the cold, my voice thrown ahead like a rope that didn't reach. The driver didn't see a man with a plan. He saw a story he'd seen too many times. The bus pulled away and took the easy part of the night with it. Money was a forgotten ally. I had traded it for meat, for rounds, for the illusion that time was on my side. No taxi, no transfers between accounts. Back then, my phone couldn't conjure miracles at checkout terminals. So I did the only thing left to do. I started walking and called home. She laughed first. Gentle, fond, the kind of laugh that forgives you in advance. She asked how far the walk would be, and I gave her an hour and a half, wrapped in optimism. She promised a bath drawing itself hot, food keeping watch in the kitchen light. I told her I loved her, and the road felt less like punishment and more like a penance I could finish. The city thinned, traded clubs for hospitals, pavements for long pockets of dark. My breath evened out. My thoughts made room for ordinary things. Tomorrow's quiet, the way soft towels feel like small kindnesses. Then my phone trembled. It was a message from her. Help. I called at once. One ring. Then instinct smothered the line. She sent me to voicemail. The screen showed dots, then words. They didn't feel like letters so much as a trap door opening beneath me. Someone's in the house. I'm under the bed. I told her to call 999. She texted. She couldn't. Sound carries. Fear carries farther. I said I would call. The world narrowed to a voice on the emergency line, patient and unflinching, asking for details the way a surgeon asks for instruments. The measured tone calmed no one. I gave the address, stripped of every unnecessary word. I begged. She promised officers were already in the area. Promises are thin until blue lights touch your street. I ran. Alcohol turned into fire in my throat. My stomach revolted against urgency, and I had to stop just long enough to empty it, wipe my mouth, and hate the seconds for being alive at all. I kept going. A taxi approached, the rooftop light a halo that made sense of the night. I waved so hard my shoulders ached. The car slowed. Then the driver took in the ruin of my shirt and made his decision. He left me with exhaust and a lesson I didn't have time to learn. When the familiar houses finally rose out of the dark, I saw what hope looks like in motion. Flashing blue police lights corrugating our front windows. I fumbled the key and shouted her name down hallways that had always answered back with quiet domestic sounds. An officer stepped out from the living room, palm lifted. "She's safe," he said. "She's inside." Safe is a generous word. Everything's fine is a lullaby you have to relearn. Inside, she was trembling so hard the air seemed to vibrate. Tears marked their own map on her face. She took one look at my shirt and asked if it was what it looked like. I told her I'd run so hard my body had argued with me. She started crying again, not from disgust, she said later, but from understanding. Panic makes a person feel useless. Running toward panic makes you feel human again. The officers made tea while they did their work. They spoke to her first, and I sat there, listening to the house tell on itself. The narrative came in careful pieces, like someone stepping across a floor that might creak. She said that after our call. She went back to the kitchen. Bacon. Sizzle. The ordinary orchestra of late-night kindness. A sound in the pantry window. She thought of the strays she fed sometimes, the ones who learned the schedule of her generosity. She went to look. It was not a cat. It was a man half poured through the window, like an unpleasant idea made soft. Head and shoulders already inside, the rest insisting on entrance. A ski mask made a tiny theater of his eyes. She hoped surprise might startle him back out, the way wildlife spooks and bolts. Instead, her presence seemed to harden his determination, as if he'd finally spotted exactly what he'd come for. She ran upstairs. Under the bed, phone pressed to chest to mute its smallest betrayals. Footsteps traveled rooms, not hurried, not random, curious. She could tell he wasn't lifting things for value. He wasn't testing drawers or sockets or... He wasn't interested in anything but a person. He came to the bedroom. She pressed her hand to her mouth and became a held breath. She could see his black trainers move across the carpet. Slowly. A hunter's patience in each step. He stopped facing the mattress, a statue rehearsing motion. She told herself to survive the first seconds if a hand reached under. She told herself to scratch and bite and make the cost of her a number he couldn't pay. He didn't reach. He started to enjoy himself, not with sound, but with attention, the kind you reserve for something you believe is about to belong to you. He drifted toward the dresser, toward the mirror where we keep our normal mornings. Something in the distance changed. A siren starting small and getting larger. Hope on a timetable. He ran downstairs, out the back, only he had one more sentence to contribute to the house. On the mirror, in the color she saved for good days, he wrote a message, 3 words that felt like a hand sliding under a door. I found you. That was our new calendar. Before that sentence, after that sentence, the police asked for everything she could give. Height, build, the way he moved. She remembered eyes that lit at discovery. Shoes like punctuation. Black Nikes with a dark red swoosh. They said shoes catch people more often than pride does. We believed them because belief keeps the night away. Weeks passed. The case didn't. We replaced locks until doors felt like vaults. Windows learned their limits. We kept the bathroom fan running longer, the kettle filled, the porch light on, even when we were home. Routine became armor. Marriage came later, quieter than we expected, but also stronger. The kind of vow that understands what it means to hold a mirror and not read it. I used to think the worst part of that night was the sprint between signal and streetlight. It wasn't. It was the speculation afterward. The question of timing played on loop. She hadn't left the window open as a habit. It was November, and the kitchen needed a little fresh air during Bacon's insistence. That means either someone chose that exact minute to peer over a wall and take his chance, or someone had been watching long enough to know that minutes sometimes become doors. People talk about gut feelings like they're folklore. The truth is simpler. The body keeps a tally. Even now, I notice angles. I notice lines of sight. I notice when a curtain breathes wrong. I notice the difference between a person who is lost and a person who is looking. We never caught him. Maybe he ran across a fence and into an alley where he'd filed away his escape route. Maybe he went somewhere without mirrors. Maybe he kept the mask as a souvenir or threw it away, indifferent to its silence. Maybe he got new shoes, or maybe he didn't think he needed to. Because shoes are only evidence if someone sees them twice. But that night gave us something I didn't know a night could give. It taught us how to inventory safety. It taught us the sound of our house settling and the sound of our house speaking up. It taught me that love is not just a promise made in daylight. It is the decision to run until your lungs hate you and a uniform tells you you can stop. Sometimes I catch myself at the bathroom sink, foam decorating the edge of my lip, head tilted the way it was while the kettle clicked. I look up and see my face, but also see him seeing it. The double exposure of the past imposed on the glass. I don't blink right away. I let the memory finish its sentence. Then I wipe the mirror clean, like it's a ritual that rewrites what gets to live here. And on especially quiet nights, when the street hasn't found a reason to speak, when the fridge hums its steady little song, when the bath scents rise like steam from the past, I think about how thin the wall is between ordinary and story. We didn't ask to live on either side. We were pushed, and then we locked the door. I still run sometimes. Not from clubs, not from missed buses, not from 10-quid regrets. I run because the body remembers who it became under pressure. I run because every footfall is a way of telling her, even years later, that I'm still coming home. Story number 4. 5 strangers will tell you a story if you ask about my face. I only tell you the true one when the night feels safe. There's a silver line under my left eye that catches street light like a thin blade. People love clean answers. Scars don't. I used to give them neat lies about skates and clumsy fun. Tonight, I'll give you what the lie was trying to protect. I was never precious about privacy, but I learned early that some truths come with interest. The mark under my eye isn't decoration. It's a receipt, proof that I once chose curiosity over common sense. Back then, Chris and I were the kind of friends stitched together by convenience and loud weekends. He had the car. I had time. We pointed both at the state fair because bright lights make small lives feel wider. The fair was sugar air and tired music, a geography of flashing bulbs where every stall promised you were 1/4 away from proving luck was real. We drifted into orbit with 3 girls by the Ferris wheel, a temporary constellation people make when they know none of it has to last beyond closing. Chris did what Chris always did, chased privacy with one of them and vanished. A magician who only knew the disappearing trick. By closing time, the fair folded itself up. Grease smoke thinned. Rides collapsed into sleeping shapes, and the lot churned with engines turning over. I walked to where Chris had parked and found absence the size of a missing car. Rage blurred my vision, then sharpened it. He had taken the car and left me. I asked a dozen strangers if anyone was going toward Carterville and watched their brake lights answer for them. The lot emptied like a tide. I started walking because anger burns fast and shoes don't. The road was long enough to measure the kind of friend Chris really was. Houses started to appear, quiet boxes with long driveways like ribs. Distance softened the noise from the highway until the night went thin and gentle. For a while, I was only a pair of legs and a heartbeat. The world reduced itself to forward. Then a window stopped me. It was a standard ground floor pane, but the light from the highway traced something on the glass that translated directly into dread. Fingers, palm, drag. Even from the street, I could read the shape. A dark bloom that looked too heavy to be grease or dirt. The mind has a way of naming what it doesn't want to say. Blood. Keep going, the careful voice said. If you don't look, it's not your problem, the lazy one whispered. The stubborn part of me, the part that drags chairs to blocked doors. One, I crossed the low fence, walked the driveway, and lifted my phone to the glass. The hand-shaped smear was blood red. It wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a message. I rang the bell. I rang again. Silence held. No footsteps. No voice. No light shrugging a lampshade awake. The road behind me felt too far, and second-guessing had already burned its chance. I slipped around the side of the house, then into the backyard, careful not to imagine a face at every dark square of window. Most curtains were drawn. The back door was locked. The night sat heavy, like a held breath. I pulled my phone out because there was one correct thing to do now. I rang the doorbell a few times. Then, when I didn't get any answer, and I didn't hear or see any movements or lights coming from inside, I decided to try and head around back to check there. My thumb hovered over the screen. The blue numbers lit my palm. A key turned. It was a small, everyday sound. It was also the loudest thing I had ever heard. The door opened inward. A man stepped out, wearing a plain mask that made him generic, and therefore more frightening. He held a handgun, with the surety of someone who didn't plan to debate with me. He told me to drop my phone and get on the ground. A map unfolded in my head. Distance to the fence, distance to his hands, the math of angles and time. I thought about trying to run, but trying to escape the way that I came in involved closing the distance between us. I did what living required. I lay flat, palms open in the grass. Another man filled the doorway behind him. Taller, quiet, a shadow with edges. Panic lives in voices, and theirs carried the frantic music of a plan dissolving. Whatever they'd planned, a robbery, or whatever it was, it obviously wasn't going as planned. The smear on the glass had told me the rest of the story without letters. Someone inside hadn't made it. I begged without the word, please. Begging is arithmetic. You give them a future where they don't have to do what they're about to do. I'm nothing. You don't need me. He told me to look up. I stared at the lawn. There's a moment when the size of your life fits inside a breath. The man didn't fire. He chose certainty over noise. He stepped in close and smashed the grip of his pistol into my face and jaw. A brutal punctuation. Light burst behind my eyes. I let my body go limp, offered no proof of consciousness. I knew well enough to play possum after the first hit, which is the one that gave me my scar. Time did that trick. It does after violence. It folded, then stretched. Tires found the street out front and rushed away. The night rinsed itself. I breathed through the ache and waited for the world to decide if it would allow me back. When the quiet took on its normal shape again, I moved. My phone lay in the grass, not where I'd dropped it. I left the yard the way fear leaves a room, as quickly as it can, out on the road. I raised my arms at the next pair of headlights, careful and visible. The car slowed. then stopped. Two strangers let me into their moving safety. No fuss, just practical care. They drove me to the emergency room, where a nurse washed the metallic taste out of the story, and a doctor stitched the new line under my eye as if he were closing a book he didn't want to read. At the hospital, an officer asked me to say the night back to him. He wrote the facts into long rectangles on a pad and nodded like a metronome. Later, at the sheriff's office, a detective from the state police made the circle official. Fingerprints, a cheek swab, questions that sounded routine and felt personal. I cooperated easily and worried quietly. Wrongful convictions don't happen to you until they do. My story checked out eventually. They released me from suspicion with a polite firmness that said, "We'll call if we need you, and we hope we won't." I kept waiting for a courtroom to want me. It never did. The house became a case number. The dead man became a line in a file. The masked men became unsolved, which is a different kind of name. I still don't fully know what happened to that poor guy and why those masked men broke in and killed him. What I do know fits on the thin space under my eye and in the thick space between impulse and caution. Here's the part I only tell after midnight. I blamed Chris for a long time. It was easier to hate the friend who left me than to face the stranger I had become, the one who climbs fences because conscience itches. The truth is that I could have called from the street and waited for glass with a badge on the other side. I could have kept walking with my ignorance intact and my face smooth. Instead, I traded a story for a scar and a question that never quits. People sometimes ask what the masked men looked like. I wish I had a portrait for you, but that's what masks steal: faces, and the relief they give the memory. One was compact, shoulders pinned close, like he was bracing for impact even before it came. The other was taller and still, the kind of quiet that smothers a room. Their voices were ordinary, which is worse than monstrous. It means some errands end in tragedy, not because demons came, but because people did. Justice didn't knock on my door with a grand speech. A detective called, then didn't. Somewhere in a storage room sits a box with photographs of a handprint, labels on swabs, measurements of a yard, copies of my words typed neat and square. Somewhere else walk two men who learned how quickly a weapon can replace a decision. And somewhere a family stares at a chair that doesn't belong to anyone anymore. You want to know if I'd stop again? I rehearse that window in my head. Glass, smear. The way red means go back and look anyway. I tell myself that next time I'll be wiser. Call first. Keep distance. Let procedure do what heroism ruins. I also know what my bones do when something is wrong. Some people have a talent for stepping away. Mine is for stepping in. Both keep you alive until they don't. Scars are arguments you carry on your skin. Mine argues that I am not the man I was before the lawn, before the pistol grip, before the door that opened the wrong way. It reminds me that lucky is a strange word for a night like that, but it still fits. I walked out. The mark also tells me I was not the only person in that story, and I was not its worst ending. When strangers ask, I still sometimes lie, not to deceive, but to keep dinners gentle. The lie is a kind one. I got it after a bad fall when I used to skate. It protects their evening and spares me the part where the room gets quiet and someone asks what the men said. On better nights, nights like this, when the house is dim and I can hear my own breath, I trade the lie for this longer thing. I give the truth its legs. Now, many moons ago, I believed I hadn't been chosen by danger yet, and that meant I was invincible. That belief ended the way beliefs do, quickly. I don't glamorize it. There was no cinematic music, no speech. There was a window, a smear, a door, a decision, and the invoice for all of them. I had little choice but to do as he told me, and the little I had would have written a different story you wouldn't be hearing. I walk that old road sometimes in my head, past houses with sleeping rooms and quiet drives. Most handprints are ordinary, sugar and sunscreen, children in summer, reaching from the outside to the inside. I notice them anyway. Vigilance doesn't relax once it learns your name. But I don't climb fences anymore. I call. I keep space. I let trained people cross thresholds because some doors are cliffs. If the world ever hands you a long road and a silent house, I wish this for you. Enough doubt to stay safe, enough compassion to act wisely, and enough luck to go home with nothing new to explain. If someone asks about your face later, I hope you can tell them a small lie that keeps your night whole. I couldn't. I carry this line instead, a hyphen between who I was and who I became. And when the story needs telling, I let it, because a scar is not a secret. It's a warning written neat and thin where you'll never forget to read it. Story number 5. 5 breaths to steady my hands. 3 steps to the mouth of the corridor I still dream about. 2 words I kept repeating. Keep moving. 1 glance at the metallic walls, and every memory surged back. 0 doubt. Someone once waited for me in there. My name is Susie, and I'm from London. And I tell this not for drama, but because geography can stalk you. The neighborhood wrapped along the river like a tired arm, and on weekend nights, the streets held the aftertaste of spilled wine and wet stone. I used to work in a restaurant that finished quite late on weekends, and that job taught me which buses never came, which shortcuts shaved minutes from the cold, and which shadows were only shadows. For months, my commute traced a ritual. Out the back door, into a wind that tasted of fryer oil and rain, past a locked-up florist whose windows reflected my shape, and toward the construction zone that split the block like a silver scar. In daylight, the walkway looked like nothing. An alley on stilts with a sort of pedestrian walkway running through the middle of it. A necessary boredom between two halves of a city. After midnight, it became a funnel. You stepped in at one end, and the world narrowed until the only things left were concrete, breath, and the scuff of your own steps. It didn't help that the path refused to go straight. The planners had surrendered to obstacles, ducts, pallets, containers, and left a zigzagging pattern that hid whatever waited 2 bends ahead. Turn, shoulder, glance, turn, shoulder, glance. The rhythm taught my nerves to listen for what sight could not provide. London is expert at staining what starts clean. The hoarding went up shiny. Weather and impatience did the rest. Paint puckered, posters curled, graffiti layered over the day's announcements until every message contradicted the last. Rain sharpened the smell of the place until the air tasted like metal and smell a bit like piss. You forgive a city, its odors, because it offers you other things. Work, noise, a name you can say without explanation. I forgave the corridor because it saved me 15 minutes. I did not have to give away. The exact same route home becomes a superstition. If nothing terrible happens, you keep repeating it, as though your footsteps have negotiated a truce with the night. I cut down that passage so often my body could sketch it in the dark. The orange work lamps haloed with gnats, the warning signs that warned nothing you didn't already know. The puddle that never dried because the ground leaned wrong. Strangers sometimes startled me at the corners. Dog walkers, smokers, 2 friends dragging laughter behind them like a wheeled suitcase. The frights were brief and embarrassing, the kind you can laugh at once your pulse behaves. Then the note appeared. It was a Tuesday, sliding into Wednesday, a shift that had boiled me soft. I wanted only a bath hot enough to erase the smell of the fryer. The first bend was quiet. The second carried a draft. On the third, the wall had been edited. Between a cartoon skull and a real estate slogan, black marker had stacked itself into a square. No flourish, no art, just sentences arranged like orders. At the top, one command: read me. I should have kept walking. A better version of me would have treated the words like a trap and left it unsprung. But the body recognizes its name the way a dog recognizes a whistle. My eyes snapped to the text before my sense could object. The salutation arrived like a cold finger on the back of my neck. Wine bar girl, who walks here most nights. I felt the corridor tilt. A freight train on the far tracks sent a vibration through the panels, and the metal shivered in sympathy. I skimmed. I would later tell myself I barely read it, that I skipped like a stone over dark water. But some part of me swallowed every line. The writer had watched me. They had measured my pace, my nights, my predictable obedience to routine. They preferred me pretty. They preferred me frightened. And then, in the blunt vocabulary of someone very proud of not using euphemisms, they promised harm, and worse than harm, as if my fear was a door, and they were practicing the key in their hand. I didn't finish. My feet took custody of the moment and marched. The city condensed to a single verb, forward. I recall just being like a cutout shaken loose from its backing, an outline without substance, moving because motion looked like survival. Every turn after that felt like lifting a small curtain and bracing for whatever might stand behind it. When I burst out to the open pavement, the sky had the color of unwashed dishes. I checked behind me twice, then again, then forced myself to stop, because I wanted to live as someone who didn't have to look. Somehow, I got home safely. But safely hides too much. I locked the door as though locks were more than theater. In the bath, steam erased the kitchen from my hair, even as memory replaced it with the corridor. Crying my eyes out in the bathtub is a phrase people use. What I did was quieter and less dignified. It had the shape of breathing that forgot its purpose. I did not tell the police. I did not write a post. I unplugged myself from the root like a lamp from a wall, and I went bright elsewhere. I wish I could say the note led to an ending with handcuffs and reports, that I followed the lines back to a person who became a cautionary tale. Stories like to promise symmetry. Real nights dissolve. The hoarding shifted as the building rose. The route rerouted. The corridor closed. I found another job that spat me out earlier. I slept in winter and walked home in summer, under ordinary stars that minded their own business. But the message followed me, not as sentences, but as a design problem I kept solving with new lines. Put your keys in your palm. Text when you're leaving. Avoid shortcuts that advertise how much time you think your safety is worth. There is another piece I don't like admitting. The threat took something that felt mine. That corridor had been an ugly habit that worked. A private shortcut I defended against friends who told me to be sensible. The note exiled me. I ceded ground to someone who might have existed only as ink. Pride knows this is reasonable. Pride hates it anyway. Cities demand we share our nervy cooperation. We donate our attention to the street, so the street will return us intact. The exchange is mostly invisible. That night made it visible, and once seen. You keep noticing the price tags on everything. I did the rituals, sent a voice note to a friend, installed nothing apps that promised to make me safer while monetizing my data, researched classes that teach your body to be a better door. The dramatic part, imagining a face for the handwriting, faded faster than the maintenance. What remained was administrative, risk spreadsheets dressed as choices. You leave earlier than you want. You time your crossings. You keep a charger in your bag because fear eats battery. You call someone at the start of a walk and hang up only at your door. The conversation itself is beige and ordinary. Receipts, chores, what to cook tomorrow. Because the point is not content. The point is to be witnessed. An audiobook of aliveness until the latch clicks months later. A rainless evening delivered me back to the neighborhood. I hadn't meant to come. I met a friend for tea. We parted near the river. My feet, nostalgic without asking permission. Threaded streets they recognized. The site had grown, as sites do. New floors wrapped in translucent sheeting, like a gift the city hadn't decided to open. The panels along the old corridor were different now, some fresh, some scoured, some quilted with stickers that contradicted each other cheerfully. I told myself I only wanted to look. The path was technically closed. A side panel, technically, was pried just enough to make a suggestion I didn't plan on accepting. I held my takeout bag, pretended to read a text, and listened to the calm evening, pretending to be harmless. Curiosity is durable. I walked 10 meters into the old noise and felt the acoustics warp distance as before. I could hear my own steps the way you hear someone else walking in the room above you. The little corners still turned the future into surprises. Then, at a seam where two panels met, someone had scraped the wall to near clean. The rectangle looked like dishonest order in honest chaos. My eyes found the center because human eyes always do. 2 words, tinier than pride. You matter, not a mural, not a campaign. 2 inked syllables in a pale square, written by a hand I will never meet. Possible consolation layered over possible threat. I stood there longer than the moment deserved. It did not cancel the other message. That is not how writing works. It merely contested it. It reminded me that the corridor did not belong to one author, not to me, not to the marker that promised harm, not even to the person who wrote kindness in miniature. Public space is a page with 1,000 hands, and the text changes every hour. I left before the evening decided to instruct me otherwise. On the main road, a bus exhaled, and people argued about directions in the gentle way people argue when the night is not yet tired. I carried dinner home and ate standing at the counter. I did not tell anyone about the 2 words because I did not want them to become brittle from retelling. But I slept, and I woke, and the next night I walked the long way without resenting myself for it. I'm not offering a moral, I'm offering an admission. The night frightened me, and I adjusted. Fear is not the only cartographer, but it draws very clear maps. If you need a rule instead of a moral, take this. Don't ignore your name when the walls say it. And the exact same route home is never the same after the city learns it with you in it. Adjustment is not surrender. It is revision. And sometimes revision is the bravest draft you get.